I didn't expect anything unusual that afternoon. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasted chicken, the kind of warm, comforting scent that used to mean family. I had been cooking since early morning, even though my knees ached and my hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Still, I managed. I always did. It was my granddaughter Lily's ninth birthday, and she had asked for my cooking specifically. That alone made every bit of effort worth it. "Grandma Anna, is the cake ready?" she called from the living room, her voice bright and impatient. "Almost, sweetheart," I answered, carefully smoothing the frosting. "Good things take time." She ran in anyway, unable to wait, her braids bouncing as she stopped beside me. "It looks perfect." I smiled. Children always say that, but with Lily, I believed it. She hugged me around the waist, and for a moment, the years seemed to fall away. Moments like that were rare now, and precious. After my husband Daniel passed away 6 years ago, the house had grown too quiet, too still. I filled it with routines, with cooking, with memories, but silence always crept back in. That's why I held on to days like this. Family days. Even if they didn't feel the same anymore. By late afternoon, everyone had arrived. My son Michael sat at the dining table scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when I placed dishes in front of him. His wife, Caroline, moved around the room with sharp, efficient steps, adjusting decorations that were already perfectly fine. She always had that way about her, like she was silently correcting the world. "You should have used different plates," she muttered at one point, barely glancing at me. "These don't match the theme." I pretended not to hear. Lily didn't care about plates. She cared about cake and laughter, and I held on to that. We gathered around the table, the food laid out carefully. I watched everyone take their seats, noticing the small things. How Michael didn't make eye contact, how Caroline inspected everything like she was judging a competition. Still, I kept smiling. For Lily. Always for Lily. "Okay." Caroline suddenly stood up, lifting her glass. "I think it's time for a toast." I paused, my fork hovering in the air. A toast? That was unusual. I slowly reached for my glass, exchanging a quick glance with Lily, who grinned excitedly. To Lily, I began softly. "Oh, actually," Caroline cut in smoothly, her smile thin. "I'll do it." Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. She raised her glass higher. "To Anna," she said, her voice sweet, but too sweet. "The strongest woman we know, who will soon be enjoying a peaceful life in a retirement home. Once everything is properly settled." The room froze. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood. But then I saw her expression. Not joking. Not embarrassed. Certain. Entitled. Michael let out a small, awkward laugh. "She's kidding, Mom." But he didn't look at me when he said it. That told me everything. Lily looked confused. "Grandma, are you moving away?" My chest tightened, but I forced my voice steady. "No, sweetheart." I gently placed my glass down on the table. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Caroline tilted her head slightly, still smiling like nothing was wrong, like she had just said something completely normal. That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger, not even hurt. Clarity. "I think," I said calmly, "there's been a misunderstanding." I stood up slowly, ignoring the way my knees protested, and walked to the sideboard. Inside the drawer was a folder I had planned to discuss privately someday. Just not like this. I returned to the table and placed the document in front of them. "This house," I said, smoothing the paper with my hand, "doesn't automatically go to anyone." Caroline's smile faltered. Michael finally looked up. "What do you mean?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Daniel and I made arrangements years ago. The house goes to the person who takes care of me in my final years." Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Caroline blinked. That can't be right. It is, I replied simply. Michael leaned forward. Mom, you don't need something like that. We're your family. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. You are. Then I looked at Caroline. But family shows up. Her face hardened instantly. We've been busy, she snapped. Of course, I said calmly. Everyone is busy. I turned slightly, letting my gaze move around the table. When I was sick last winter, I continued, it wasn't family who came every day. I paused. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Keller. Michael shifted in his seat. Caroline said nothing. Lily looked between us, her small face uncertain. Is something wrong? I forced a gentle smile.
No, sweetheart.
Everything's fine. Then I clapped my hands lightly. Who wants cake? The moment passed. Or, at least, everyone pretended it did. We sang. Lily blew out her candles. Presents were opened. Laughter returned, but it felt different now. Forced. Fragile. Like something had cracked beneath the surface. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the kitchen. The dishes were done. The house was quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Clearer. Like a fog had lifted. For years, I had convinced myself that distance was normal, that people got busy, that love didn't always look like attention. But that toast, it stripped everything down to the truth. To them, I wasn't Anna. I wasn't a mother. I wasn't even a person. I was an outcome. An asset. A future transaction. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. Next door, Mrs. Keller's porch light was on. I could see her silhouette moving inside, probably making tea. She had brought me soup when I couldn't get out of bed. She had checked on me without being asked. She had remembered my birthday.
No expectations. No calculations.
Just kindness. I picked up my phone, hovered over Michael's name, then lowered it again. Not tonight. Instead, I opened my contacts and added a new note beside Mrs. Keller's name. Someone who shows up. That was the night everything began to change. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, decisively. Because for the first time in years, I stopped waiting. The days after Lily's birthday passed in a strange, stretched kind of quiet, the kind that doesn't feel peaceful but heavy, like something waiting to happen. I kept expecting Michael to call, not because he always did, but because this time felt different. There are moments in life when something shifts so clearly that you assume everyone else must feel it too. That uncomfortable toast, the way I responded, the look on his face, it should have meant something. But my phone stayed silent. No missed calls. No messages. Just the same stillness that had filled my house for years. Only now I saw it differently. I wasn't being forgotten accidentally. I was being placed aside, neatly, conveniently. On Thursday evening, just as I was folding laundry in the living room, the phone finally rang. I didn't rush to pick it up. I let it ring twice, then 3 times, before answering. Hello, I said, keeping my voice neutral.
Mom.
Hey. Michael's voice came through, overly bright, almost rehearsed. I was thinking maybe I could come by tomorrow, fix a few things around the house. You mentioned that cabinet door a while back, right? I looked at the cabinet across the room. I had fixed it myself 2 months ago. And Caroline found this great health supplement, he continued quickly, filling the silence. It's supposed to help with joints, energy, all that. She thought of you right away. Of course she did. Just like that, the silence of the past weeks suddenly made sense. This wasn't concern. This was adjustment. They had recalculated. That would be nice, I said slowly. Not because I believed it, but because I wanted to see how far they would go. They arrived the next afternoon carrying bags. Caroline walked in first, her smile carefully placed, like she had practiced it in the mirror. Anna, you look wonderful, she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Michael followed with a toolbox and a casserole dish. We brought dinner, he added. I thanked them and stepped aside, watching as they moved through my home. Not like guests, but like inspectors. Caroline's eyes lingered on everything: the furniture, the shelves, the framed photos. Not appreciating, evaluating, measuring. You've kept everything exactly the same, she commented, running her fingers lightly along the back of a chair. So, traditional. I smiled faintly. Some things don't need changing, I replied. Michael disappeared into the kitchen, pretending to check something that didn't need fixing, and as soon as he was out of earshot, Caroline's tone shifted. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I hope you didn't take what I said the wrong way at the party, she said quietly, tilting her head. It was just a joke. You know how humor can be misinterpreted. I looked at her, really looked this time, and saw no apology there. Only strategy. Of course, I said calmly. Misunderstandings happen. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, encouraged. Good, she said. Because we've been thinking at this stage in life, it's important to have things organized properly. You know, legal matters, future arrangements. There it was again. Always circling the same subject, just dressed in different words. Over the next few weeks, their behavior changed completely. Michael called every few days. Caroline came along to every visit, always with something in her hands: food, vitamins, small gifts that felt less like kindness and more like investment. They invited me over for dinner, something they hadn't done in over a year. They asked about my health, my routines, my needs. But it all felt off. Too consistent. Too deliberate. Like actors who had suddenly remembered their roles. One afternoon, I came home earlier than expected from the grocery store and found Caroline in my study. The drawer where I kept my documents was slightly open. She jumped when she saw me.
Oh.
I was just looking for a pen, she said quickly. There was a pen sitting right in front of her. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. The truth was already clear. That night, I sat by the window and thought about everything. About the sudden attention. About the careful questions. About the way they watched me when they thought I didn't notice. It wasn't love. It was positioning. And for the first time, instead of feeling hurt, I felt curious. I wanted to know how far it went. Who they really were when they thought no one was watching. That's when the idea came to me. Simple. Honest in its own way. A test. Saturday afternoon, I put the plan into motion. I moved the coffee table slightly, then slowly lowered myself to the floor. My heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from what I might discover. I picked up my phone and called Michael first. It rang until voicemail. Michael, I said, letting my voice tremble just enough. I've fallen. I can't get up. Please come. I hung up and called Caroline. Same result. Voicemail. I left the same message. Then, after a brief hesitation, I scrolled further down my contacts and called Mrs. Keller. She answered on the second ring. Anna, is everything okay? Her voice was immediate. Alert. I fell, I said quietly. I can't seem to get up. There was no pause. I'm coming right now, she said. The line went dead. I hadn't even put the phone down before I heard her at my door. The bell rang once, then again urgent. Anna, she called. It's me. Keys under the flower pot. I managed. Seconds later, she was inside, breathless, still wearing her gardening gloves. She dropped to her knees beside me, her face full of concern. Where does it hurt? Can you move? Should I call an ambulance? There was no hesitation.
No calculation. Just care.
Real, immediate care. I sat up slowly, my chest tightening for a completely different reason now. I'm not hurt. I said quietly. She blinked, confused. What? I took a breath.
I'm sorry. I...
I needed to know something. I explained everything, the party, the sudden attention, the feeling that something wasn't right. She listened without interrupting, her expression softening as I spoke. When I finished, she nodded slowly. You called them first, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. And they didn't come. I shook my head. She sat back slightly, pulling off her gloves. Sometimes, she said gently, people show you exactly who they are. You just have to be willing to see it. We moved to the kitchen after that, and I made tea. My phone remained silent on the table between us. No calls. No messages. Just stillness. Mrs. Keller told me about her garden and about a book she was reading, about small things that somehow felt more meaningful than anything I had heard from my own family in months. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not as a responsibility. Not as a future asset. Just as Anna. It was nearly 4 hours later when my phone finally buzzed. A message from Michael. Hey Mom, just saw your voicemail. Everything okay? I stared at the screen for a long moment, then placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't answer, because I already had my answer. I looked at Mrs. Keller, who was smiling as she described how she once accidentally planted herbs in the wrong order and ended up with the strangest combination of flavors. I laughed softly, shaking my head, and in that moment, something settled inside me. Not anger. Not sadness.
Clarity.
Family wasn't about who was supposed to care. It was about who actually did.
And now,
I knew. The morning after my little fall test, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my mind refused to rest. There's a certain kind of clarity that comes after disappointment, not the sharp sting of it, but the quiet understanding that settles in afterward. I made myself coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and looked around the house that had once felt too large and too empty. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like something else entirely. Something unfinished. Something waiting. At exactly 9:12 a.m., there was a loud knock at the door. Not hesitant. Not polite. Demanding.
Mom.
Open up. Michael. I didn't rush. I took my time finishing my coffee, rinsing the cup, and only then walking to the door. When I opened it, he stepped inside immediately, Caroline right behind him, her expression already tense. Why didn't you answer my message? Michael asked, his voice tight. I was worried. I closed the door slowly. Were you? I asked calmly. Caroline crossed her arms. We came as soon as we could this morning. Of course, I replied. That would be about 15 hours later. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. We had commitments yesterday. Lily had activities. You know how busy things get. Yes, I said. I'm starting to understand exactly how busy you are. That seemed to irritate Caroline. She stepped forward slightly, her tone sharpening. Anna, this isn't fair. We can't drop everything every second. We have responsibilities. I held her gaze. And I don't. That stopped her for a second. Then, as always, she pivoted. Well, she said, smoothing her expression, that's actually why we're here. There it was again. Not concern. Purpose. We moved into the kitchen, and I noticed how both of them looked around, not like guests, but like people imagining changes, measuring walls, considering space. Michael cleared his throat. Mom, we've been thinking. After what happened with your fall. I didn't fall, I said. He hesitated, then continued anyway.
Right.
But it could have been real. That's the point. Caroline stepped in smoothly. Living alone at your age carries risks. Serious risks. And we just want to make sure you're safe. I leaned against the counter, folding my arms. Go on. Michael exchanged a quick glance with her, then took a breath. What if you sold this house? Silence. Not surprised. Just confirmed. Caroline continued quickly, filling the space. We've discussed it thoroughly. You could move in with us. We'd convert the basement into a comfortable living space just for you. You'd have everything you need, and we'd be right upstairs if anything happened. I almost smiled. Almost. My own space in the basement, I repeated. It would be very nice, she insisted. And honestly, this house is too much for you now. The upkeep alone. I managed just fine. Michael stepped closer. Mom, please don't take this the wrong way. We're trying to help. You don't need all this space anymore. I looked around slowly. The kitchen, the hallway, the staircase Daniel had once fixed himself. You're right, I said quietly. Caroline's eyes lit up, just for a second. Too fast, too eager. But I don't need to sell it either, I added. Her expression froze. I've actually been thinking, I continued, walking over to the table and picking up a folder I had prepared. If space is the issue, there are other solutions. Michael frowned. What kind of solutions? I'm considering renting out the spare rooms. Silence hit the room like a dropped plate. Caroline blinked. I'm sorry, what? A home-sharing arrangement, I said calmly. Students, young professionals, people who need affordable housing. Her reaction was immediate. Absolutely not. Michael raised his hands slightly. Mom, that's risky. Is it? I asked. Yes, Caroline snapped. You'd be bringing strangers into your home. They'd have access to everything. Your belongings. Your documents. I tilted my head. Like someone going through my study when I'm not home? That landed.
Hard.
She stiffened. Excuse me? I came home early last week, I said evenly. You were in my study, looking for a pen. Michael looked at her, confused. Caroline? It was exactly what I said, she replied quickly. I needed to leave a note. There was a pen on the desk, I said. Silence. Michael's face tightened. I didn't raise my voice.
I didn't need to.
I'm not naive, I continued. I may be older, but I see what's happening. Caroline's composure cracked. We're trying to protect you. From what? I asked. From having control over my own life? Michael stepped in again, more cautiously now. Mom, we're just concerned. That's all. I softened slightly when I looked at him, because, unlike Caroline, I could still see something real in his eyes. Confusion.
Conflict.
Are you? I asked gently. He hesitated and didn't answer. Caroline exhaled sharply.
Fine.
Let's be honest then. Things have been difficult lately. There it was. Finally. What kind of difficult? I asked. She glanced at Michael, then back at me. Financially. He looked uncomfortable. The market hasn't been great. Some of our investments didn't work out. And the lake house? I asked. Silence again. Caroline looked irritated now. We may have to sell it. I nodded slowly. I see. The pieces clicked into place perfectly. Their sudden visits.
The gifts.
The concern. The urgency.
It was never about me.
It was about solving their problem. Well, Caroline said, her tone shifting again, softer now, almost persuasive. That's why this makes sense for everyone. You sell this house, move in with us. We all support each other. It's practical. Practical. That word echoed in my mind, reducing a lifetime of memories to practicality. I walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. Mrs. Keller's garden was visible next door, bright and alive. I've already made my decision, I said. Behind me, I heard them both go still. I'm not selling the house. Caroline's voice turned cold. You're being unreasonable. I turned back slowly.
No.
I'm being clear. Michael looked at me differently then. Not frustrated. Not dismissive. Just uncertain. Mom, he said quietly, you've changed. I met his eyes. Yes, I said. I have. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain it. Caroline grabbed her purse abruptly. This is a mistake, she muttered. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said calmly, but it will be my mistake to make. Michael lingered for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. But whatever it was, he swallowed it. We'll talk again, he said finally. I nodded. Of course. After they left, the house felt quiet again. But not empty. Not anymore. I sat down at the table and opened my folder, reviewing the documents I had been preparing.
Plans. Notes.
Ideas. Not about survival.
About living.
For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to include me in their life. I was building my own, and this time, no one would take it from me. The decision I made that morning didn't feel dramatic. There was no sudden rush of excitement, no sense of rebellion like in the movies. It was quieter than that, steadier, like placing a final stone into something that had been forming for a long time without me even realizing it. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing, and that changed everything. Over the next few weeks, I began putting my plans into motion. Not quickly, not recklessly, but carefully, with intention. I contacted a local home sharing program that specialized in matching older homeowners with vetted renters. The process was thorough: background checks, interviews, references, compatibility assessments. It didn't intimidate me. If anything, it reassured me. This wasn't about opening my doors blindly, it was about inviting the right people in. The first person I met through the program was a nursing student named Rachel. She was in her final year, working long shifts at the hospital while trying to keep up with her studies. When she walked into my home for the interview, she didn't look around like Caroline had, measuring value or scanning for opportunity. She looked at me.
Directly.
Warmly. Thank you for meeting with me, Mrs. Anna, she said. Just Anna, I corrected gently. She smiled. Thank you, Anna. We talked for nearly an hour. Not just about rent or schedules, but about life. Her goals. Her exhaustion. Her determination. There was something honest about her, something grounded. When she left, the house felt different, not because she had taken anything with her, but because she had brought something in. Possibility. 2 weeks later, Rachel moved into the upstairs bedroom. And just like that, the silence in my house began to change. It wasn't immediate. At first, it was just small things. The sound of footsteps upstairs. The faint hum of music in the evenings. A second cup in the sink. But gradually, those small things grew into something fuller. Conversations over morning coffee. Late-night talks when she came home from the hospital, too wired to sleep. Laughter that didn't feel forced or obligatory. It felt natural. Encouraged by how well things were going, I continued with the program. The basement apartment, which had been unused for years, was renovated into a comfortable space. Soon after, a young couple, Daniel and Marcus, moved in. Both were music teachers at a nearby college, passionate, expressive, and endlessly kind. The house that had once echoed with silence now carried music. Piano in the afternoons. Soft guitar in the evenings. Occasional bursts of laughter that spilled from one room to another. I didn't just hear life again. I felt it. Mrs. Keller became a regular presence too, though she always had been in her own quiet way. Now, instead of brief conversations over the fence, she joined us for dinners, for tea, for long discussions that stretched late into the night. She brought stories, warmth, and a sense of continuity, like she had always been part of something I had only just begun to see. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "You've changed, Anna." I smiled slightly. "Everyone keeps saying that." "And how do you feel about it?" she asked. I thought about it. "Like I finally stopped waiting," I said. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Michael and Caroline, on the other hand, did not take the change as well. At first, it was subtle. Fewer calls, shorter conversations, a certain coldness in Caroline's tone whenever we spoke. But it didn't stay subtle for long. One evening, they showed up unannounced again. Caroline walked in and stopped abruptly when she saw Rachel at the dining table, textbooks spread out in front of her. "Who is this?" she asked sharply. "This is Rachel," I said calmly. "She lives here now." Caroline's expression darkened immediately. "You actually went through with this?" Michael looked around, clearly surprised by how different everything felt. The house looked brighter, livelier, fuller. "It's busy here," he said. "Yes," I replied simply. "It is." Dinner that night was tense. Caroline barely spoke to Rachel, and when she did, it was with a thin politeness that fooled no one. Daniel and Marcus were friendly, but even they could feel the shift in the room. "This isn't what we talked about," Caroline said finally, putting her fork down. "We didn't talk," I corrected gently. "You suggested." I decided. She leaned forward. "You're putting yourself at risk." "I've never felt safer," I replied. That wasn't entirely about physical safety. Michael watched the interaction closely, something unreadable in his expression. "Mom," he said after a moment, "you seem different here." I met his gaze. "I am," I said, and I didn't soften it this time. After they left, Rachel hesitated in the kitchen. "I hope I didn't cause any trouble," she said quietly. I shook my head. "You didn't cause anything," I said. "You're part of something better." She smiled at that, and I realized something important in that moment. This wasn't just about independence. It was about connection. Real connection. In the weeks that followed, my life continued to expand in ways I hadn't expected. Through Mrs. Keller, I joined a local community group, women my age who met weekly not to complain about getting older, but to actually live. They organized events, volunteered, shared stories, and supported each other in ways that felt genuine and effortless. I started reading to children at the hospital where Rachel worked. I helped Daniel and Marcus plan a small neighborhood concert. I even redecorated parts of the house, something I hadn't done in years. Color replaced neutrality. Life replaced stillness. Meanwhile, the messages from Michael became less frequent, more cautious, more distant. And then one evening I received a text. "Mom, Caroline found a really nice assisted living community. We should go see it this weekend." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I put my phone down without answering, because for the first time I didn't feel the need to justify my choices. Not to him. Not to anyone. That night, the house was full. Rachel was studying in the living room. Music drifted up softly from the basement. Mrs. Keller was in the kitchen, telling a story that made all of us laugh. And I stood there, in the middle of it all, realizing something simple and powerful. I wasn't alone. Not because I had forced family to stay, but because I had allowed the right people to come. And for the first time in years, I felt at home. By the time I turned 66, my life no longer revolved around waiting. Waiting for a phone call, waiting for a visit, waiting for someone to remember that I existed. That version of me, the one who sat by the window hoping, felt like a distant memory. In her place stood someone steadier, someone who had quietly rebuilt her world without asking permission. And the most surprising part was this. I hadn't lost my family. I had simply learned to recognize the one I was actually living in. That morning began with the soft hum of movement throughout the house. Not noise, never noise, but presence. Rachel was already awake, moving around the kitchen with the comfortable ease of someone who belonged there. I could hear the faint clink of dishes, the kettle heating, the low murmur of music playing from her phone. Downstairs, Daniel was at the piano again, practicing something slow and thoughtful, while Marcus's voice occasionally drifted up, correcting a note or suggesting a different tempo. The house breathed in a way it never had before. I stepped into the kitchen, and Rachel turned immediately, her face lighting up. "Happy birthday, Anna," she said, wrapping me in a quick, genuine hug. "Not careful, not polite, real. You're not allowed to do anything today, just so you know. We have plans." "Plans?" I raised an eyebrow. "Surprises," she corrected with a grin. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. A year ago, the idea of anyone planning something for me, without expectation, without obligation, would have felt strange. Now it felt natural, earned, in a way I hadn't understood before. As the day unfolded, the house slowly filled. Mrs. Keller arrived first, carrying a carefully wrapped package and wearing that same warm, knowing smile she always had. "Another year wiser," she said as she stepped inside. "Or, at least, more stubborn." "Definitely more stubborn," I replied. Soon after, Daniel and Marcus came upstairs with trays of food, filling the dining table with dishes that looked far more elaborate than anything I had ever made for myself. Rachel had decorated the room, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful touches. Streamers, flowers, small details that showed care rather than effort. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in. This wasn't the life I had expected, but it was the life I had chosen. We gathered around the table, talking easily, laughing without forcing it. No one checked their phone every 5 minutes. No one seemed distracted or impatient. Conversations flowed naturally, from Rachel's stories at the hospital to Daniel's students, to Mrs. Keller's latest garden experiments. At one point, I realized I had been laughing continuously for several minutes, and it startled me slightly. Not because it felt unfamiliar anymore, but because it had once been so rare. "You're glowing today," Mrs. Keller said quietly at one point, leaning closer. "Am I?" I asked. "Yes," she nodded. "Because you finally stopped shrinking your life to fit other people's expectations." I didn't respond right away, because she was right. The doorbell rang just as we were about to bring out the cake. Rachel jumped up immediately. "I'll get it." I wasn't expecting anyone else, but in this house, unexpected had started to mean something good. Still, when I heard Rachel's voice pause slightly at the door, something in my chest shifted. "Anna," she called. I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway. Michael stood in the doorway, alone. He looked different. Not physically exactly, but something about him had softened. Or perhaps it had simply lost its certainty. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, holding out a small wrapped box. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I stepped aside. "You should come in." The atmosphere in the house changed, not tense, but aware. Conversations quieted slightly as he entered, taking in the room, the people, the life that existed here now without him. Rachel gave him a polite smile. Daniel and Marcus nodded in greeting. Mrs. Keller watched quietly, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "This is nice," Michael said, his voice uncertain. "This is my home," I replied. And I meant more than just the house. We made space at the table for him. No one made him feel unwelcome, but no one pretended either. He was a guest here now, not the center of anything. And I could see that realization settling in slowly as he looked around. "You've changed things," he said after a while. "Yes," I replied simply. He nodded, as if trying to understand something he hadn't expected to see. After cake, he asked if we could talk outside. We stepped onto the porch, the evening air calm and cool, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the garden Mrs. Keller had helped me revive months ago. For a moment, we just stood there. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. I didn't interrupt. "I should have been there," he continued. "Not just that day, all the days before it. I kept telling myself I was busy, that life was complicated, that you understood. But the truth is, I didn't make you a priority." There was no defensiveness in his voice now, just honesty. "I know," I said quietly. He looked down at his hands. "Caroline and I all were separating." I felt a flicker of surprise, but not shock. "I see," I said. "It's been building for a while," he continued. "But after everything that happened, after seeing how she treated you, how I let it happen, I couldn't ignore it anymore." I studied his face carefully. For the first time in a long time, I saw not just my son, but a man trying to understand his own mistakes. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," he said. I want a chance to do better." I let the silence sit between us for a moment, because this mattered. Not just for him, but for me. "I'm not the same person anymore," I said finally. "I know," he replied. "And I won't go back to being someone who waits," I continued. "You shouldn't," he said. That answer mattered. "You can be part of my life," I said slowly. "But not the way it was before. Not out of obligation. Not out of expectation." He nodded immediately. "I understand." "And Tyler?" I asked. "He misses you," Michael said. "A lot." My chest tightened slightly. "He's always welcome here," I said. "Always." We stood there a little longer, the distance between us no longer filled with resentment, but not yet with ease either. Something in between. Something honest. When we went back inside, the conversation resumed naturally. Michael stayed for a while, quieter than usual, observing more than speaking. But he wasn't excluded. He was simply included differently. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms and the house had settled into a peaceful quiet, I sat on the porch with Mrs. Keller, 2 cups of tea between us.
"He's trying," she said.
"Yes," I agreed. "And you?" she asked. I looked out at the yard, at the lights glowing softly in the windows of the house behind me. "I'm no longer trying to be needed," I said. I paused. "I'm choosing to be valued."
She smiled at that.
As the night deepened and the world grew still, I thought back to that moment at Lily's birthday, the cruel toast, the silence that followed, the shift it had triggered inside me. What was meant to diminish me had freed me, because in losing the illusion of family, I had found the real thing. And this time, it was built on truth.